Welcome to the Entrepreneur Mindset Show. Hold the mustard. I'm here with my co-host Brad Wattridge. We'd just like to press live for Instagram so that we don't lose our audience on that side. Today's topic is the final in the segment of the God complex, right? And we'll be addressing how many SMMEs grapple with handling clients who exhibit the God complex. These are the clients who come across as overly dominant, always right, and unyielding. And instead of focusing on the typical behaviors of business owners, we're flipping the script today. Because in the previous segments, we were talking about how SMMEs are not necessarily as strong enough or have enough conviction to stay in their truth and in their values, and how they are actually exhibiting that God complex. Now we're saying, let's talk about some practical strategies for maintaining a professional relationship when faced with difficult clients. So, Brad, this is a once a month segment. Thank you, Salama, for joining us already on the Instagram. And for anyone else that is here, this segment is not just about me and Brad talking. Please engage us about this topic. What are your experiences on difficult clients? Have you had the courage to walk away from clients or suppliers, whatever the context is for you, or even companies that you work for? If you're not an SMME, let us know what exactly your experiences have been and what strategies you undertook to overcome this. Brad, so I hand over to you because this is really a conversation in around what you've discovered in the last while since we've chatted. And we always like to bring some practical examples of this to make it more real for those that are listening in.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just coming off the back of spending time in more rural markets. And we actually had this discussion before we went live about, we sometimes feel like because we operate from a point, we like to believe because we operate from a point of integrity that we kind of expect that from everyone else. But we also know that that is not reality. But what I do find is that more in the urban areas and the more kind of city type environments, you do find a lot of clients that operate within the God complex space. And when we refer to God complex, we refer to it as a phenomenon that we use as SMMEs to either give us the confidence that we need, or we use it in situations when we feel attacked or we feel, that we're under pressure. We would put that God complex on to protect ourselves. And as you know, as SMMEs, like yourself and me, we are very emotionally involved in our business. We've paid a lot of emotional tax to run our business. So, but in this instance, we're kind of referring to it as something your clients have, and they actually have on a more permanent basis when they deal with suppliers, and what you need to look out for and how you can navigate around that and still do business with the client, but avoid the traps that they tend to set for you to fall into, to keep them in their position of power. So yeah, that's the angle for today.
Okay, we're going to be covering about, I think there are 10 key points that we want to reflect on. I'm going to, at a high level, just mention what they are for those that are joining us so that they can understand what to expect in today's conversation. But first point would be around recognizing the God complex in clients. Then we'll shift into maintaining those professional boundaries, moving on to managing expectations from the start, and then communicating with confidence, backing your position with data, and active listening to diffuse tension. And then we have the last 4, which is offering controlled choices, staying objective, not emotional, because we've just said we are emotional beings, knowing when to walk away. And then last but not least is reflecting on your own approach. So a very, very intriguing topic. And I think I'd like to start with from the beginning, how do we recognize the God complex in clients? What are those warning signs that we must spot? Because it's not always easy when we are maybe both in this emotional state, both client as well as us, ourselves as SMMEs.
I think it depends. I mean, if you're working with a corporate, they tend to have that ability to kind of tone down on the emotional element, and they have that ability, like when they come into work, to kind of cut that off. Business is business. Those sayings that we say, emotions,
Yes.
leave your emotions at home. This is just business, nothing personal. For me, that annoys me when someone says that, because for us SMMEs, it's everything personal. We've invested everything into this: heart, mind, body, and soul. And when we come into that situation and we have a client, and the first thing is when the client challenges you off, when you share your expertise and you say to, for example, the client, this is the way I feel we need to move, and this is where my experience tells us we need to be, and the client challenges you just for the point of challenging more than from the information you're sharing, that's a clear sign that you're dealing with someone who operates from the God complex, someone who's never wrong, someone who will tell you or instruct you to do things their way, even though you know from a professional level that it's not going to work. And the key is, as soon as you see that, it's almost like you need to call on these points that we're going to raise to be able to navigate through that. Otherwise, one or two things is going to happen. One, they're going to really mess with your mind, and they're going to become a client that you don't enjoy, and a client that you feel like you don't want to work with. You're just doing it for the money. Or two, you're just not going to even last that long. You're going to get into an argument with the client. You're going to get into a fight with the client. Something's going to happen, and that's going to scar you as a business owner. And I can vouch from personal experience. It will forever work on your confidence, so that when you go into the next situation, you're going to feel, I must be careful here, even if that person is not operating from the God complex.
Yeah. Brad, I was telling you today that I concluded a 9-month program where I facilitated with business owners. And whenever I start any session, I talk about clearing the space, or, just doing a check-in of where they are and what they were celebrating. And because today was the final session, it was so interesting for me how many spoke about letting go of toxic relationships and understanding when you need to be discerning around not allowing that in our space, because the amount of energy that's invested in salvaging those type of relationships, that especially the ones with the God complex, could be better received in terms of return on effort and time and resources elsewhere. And it's not easy for us as SMMEs, because as you say, other than being emotionally invested, every sale or every transaction for us is important. So, I mean, it's quite difficult when you are dealing with that particular client to walk away. But how do we walk away in a manner that is there an amicable way to walk away, or do we just get it out into the open? I don't know.
I think there is a way, and there's a way to work with a client that operates in that space. I think you got to understand, and perhaps this is where we maybe can do a bit better. And I can talk from experience, a recent experience that I had, where I did some service or did some work for a client, and the owner of the company most definitely operates from the God complex, so much so that they control every part of their business, and it really hinders their business to grow. And I myself, when I brought my partners on board, operated from that space as well. So we get the reasons why they do it, why they do operate in that space, but it is very difficult for us to work with someone like that. But I think the key thing is I know I've just said we're very emotionally involved, but the key way of surviving this is to try and draw off the emotion and sit down and work with facts. If, for example, you want to implement a strategy and the client says, no, you will do it my way, make it clear to the client, look, not a problem. We will do the strategy this way, which is ultimately your way. But these are the possible repercussions we may receive from this. The client will probably ignore that, but that's documented and put down. And track your journey with the client. Every step you make, every decision that gets made, every override that gets given. So you go in, you present something, generally you would walk away and find that the client's come in and overridden you and told the team to do something else. Document that, not in a nasty way, just to say, I've taken note that the strategy has shifted back to that point. We will work from that point. And yes, that's going to be very challenging, but see it See it as more of a journey than a kind of a destination, because throughout that journey, what you're doing is you're building trust with that person. And eventually that person's guard will be lit and you'll be able to step in and say, look, I get that there are changes that you don't want made. I get that you're operating from a space where you're protecting the business, but it's coming off from a different base than what I'm receiving. And that is creating these kind of issues in your business. So I think the most important thing is work with fact. Sit down, get yourself out of the situation that's getting you emotional. Sit down somewhere and put the facts on the table and see where you can work around the facts rather than getting hyper emotional about it. They are going to say things that's going to trigger you. And you know, as SMMEs, we have a lot of trigger. So if they trigger...
Sorry, you're actually leading into the second point, which is maintaining those professional boundaries. And I love the approach that you're taking, because you still want to maintain the relationship, build on the trust factor, and so that when you eventually have to walk away, the person has enough facts and evidence to showcase to him or her that you're not walking away because of an emotional stance. You're walking away because there is a certain boundary that's been overstepped, and you've tried to understand that boundaries up front, because it's both ways. But if we can't maintain those professional boundaries, it is now time to walk away, because it's not a win-win for both in the partnership. It's actually one-sided.
Yeah, there are SMMEs out there that have that, but especially the SMMEs that come from corporate, that understand how the corporate environment. So, for example, I work for a big corporate. I see an opportunity to offer them the service that I'm employed for. I leave, I create a business, I offer them the service, they take my service. I'm basically dealing with the same client as B that I used to work for. So then I understand the industry, I know how it works. There, you would probably have a high success rate because you actually know the team you're working with. But most of us who create our markets, who go out and look for fresh business, won't really know what we're getting into until we start dealing with the client. And it might not even be the person you're dealing with. It might be, from our perspective, we're usually the sales team or the marketing guys. And then the CEO comes in and he's got this complex that he's working from. Whatever strategy you've put in place, he doesn't like it because he's been doing this for the last 20, 30 years. And we all know it doesn't work. You know, you all got to be adaptive. So boundaries are important, because if you're too friendly with the person that you are contacted with, the marketing person or the salesperson or whoever, the production manager or the FM, then it's going to make it very awkward and difficult when the CEO comes in and he pushes this kind of form of thinking onto the situation. Always try and maintain a professional boundary. Don't try and make friends, because we're not here to be friends. We're here to offer a service. But we will treat you with the respect that we would want to be treated with, because as SMMEs, we're very well aware that we are human and we are emotional. So we will tap into that. But you might not necessarily come to my next wedding, for example.
Yes. So, Brad, I just want to acknowledge a very beautifully written comment from Noreen. But Avril, thank you for joining, as well as Kelly on the Instagram. Salama, Avril and Kelly, any comments on your side? Where have you personally experienced the God complex within your professional lives? But Noreen's comment says, I find it even more difficult to walk away from collaborations with fellow SMME owners who have a God complex, especially in a climate where work isn't always flowing in steadily. Those who are perceived as dominant are often receiving more work, and we're therefore forced to work or collaborate with them. That is such a powerful comment there, you know, because if you assert yourself in this dominant manner, as Noreen is just describing, it does somehow carry a different weight than you being very soft and nurturing in your approach and empathetic. Those all play an important role, because if we can't lead with empathy and lead with proper values, already there's a huge question mark on that exchange and whether that relationship should exist or not. But what would be your response to Noreen, Brad?
Look, immediately I want to say toughen up and become that dominant player. But I think our skill set needs to be kind of like coloring in crayons. We must know when to pull out the red, know when to pull out the blue. We need to be adaptive in our approach. Yes, it's an amazing thing and an attribute to be a very calm and a very, usually it's the quiet one that's a good strategist because they listen, they pay attention to the environment. But there are times as business owners that you are going to need to step into the ring and you need to fight for the work. And that doesn't need to be unethical. That can still be a good, solid fight that you go on and you get the work. And when you do get the work, you acknowledge the challenges that you have had and the challengers, meaning the others that have also tried to get the work. So I think it's a sign that you need to maybe be a bit stronger. And I think you need to have that dominant role, play that dominant role. We spoke in the previous sessions that although we don't condone the God complex in any form, there are attributes of the God complex that we as SMMEs can learn from. And that is when to believe that we have the power, we have the strength, we can own it, and we can be a little bit more forceful in pushing the work to our side. If we're in a collaboration, let's say Anissa and I are in a collaboration, but we are so busy fighting egos and fighting each other to find out who is the dominant, we're not going to get anywhere. So my suggestion is have an ego meeting and say, this is who I am, this is who you are. You're probably going to close most of the work, but you need my support in this space. Can we play these roles? Are you open to that? Can we end the discussion and move forward? And that would be my suggestions.
Well noted. Welcome, Jason Fishman, that's on Instagram. And then Janine is also stating, Janine Horn, walked away for the first time and it took courage. It was an awakening. It does take courage. It does take courage because we are feeding families. We are, not that we have a scarcity lack mindset, but every transaction or partnership or collaboration is important for us. Because for everyone lost, we need to go and replace that income. So I concur. It took a lot of courage, and well done to you, Janine, for doing so.
Well
I love that you said let's have an ego meeting. And that works both ways. I think it's whether you have the God complex, and what I also agree with completely is the shadow side, the light side, and the shadow side of this particular complex. There's the good and the bad of both of it, and we must not undermine that. We're living in a world of duality and polarity, and that will always exist. It's at what point do we leverage the particular perceived dark side of a complex or a behavior or a sabotaging mannerism or way of being to our advantage, and which you've responded to already. So, now we're moving on to parts of which we've also discussed is managing expectations from the start and communicating with confidence, right? And you also touched on backing our position with data, because that example that you articulated earlier on, if we're having this client with this God complex, make sure we gather data, not because we're wanting to do so from a demeaning or manipulative way, but so that it shows the mirror back to the client in a gentle, empathetic way, rather than saying, I'm showing you and I'm better. It's less egoic if we come with the facts. Where else are we moving to this conversation? Because we seem to be touching on a lot of points simultaneously. Where would you like to take this conversation to?
I think for me, it's to the thing that I believe we really need to focus on as SMMEs, and that is the ability to shift our position when we need to. So, for example, Janine was able to walk away from the client. The build up to that walk away, I'm almost certain must have been one of the most emotional things that Janine has gone through. And it's never really recognized. It's not discussed in SMME groups. It's that emotional price that we pay. And when a client is operating from a God complex, the client will be very quick to pick up your trigger points. We all have them. We're all human. And we'll use those trigger points when they need to. So if you find you're in a meeting and you're getting triggered, the best thing to do is to try and step away from that situation as quickly as you can, for whatever reason you can give, and sit down and evaluate what is your position. What are the trigger points that are being affected? What is your position? And are you as an SMME able to work in that environment? Because I'm just got my head in the clouds, but I always use the analogy of a Smurf village. Like everyone is just so happy to do their stuff, man. You know, you've got, although it's a weird situation with Smurfette only, but we won't get into that. But everyone's got a profession. Everyone's got everyone's got a role to play, and everybody respects each other's role. And I believe that is where we are as SMMEs. We all have our greatness. And whether you're selling flowers on the side of the road or whether you're running a law firm, we all have greatness in some form or the other. But when you work with someone who operates from the God complex and they're, for example, a corporate client, you have to weigh up the cost of that client. So the revenue you get, the rands and cents or the dollars or whatever your revenue base is in, and you have to weigh up, is it really worth it for you? And if your answer is, this is a big client and this is definitely worth it for me, you then going to have to be the one that steps up and kind of puts that boundary in place around the triggers, knowing that that's what's going to happen. So a quick way to pick that up is that if you feel nervous and anxious for a meeting purely because a specific person is attending that meeting, you need to address that. And one of the ways that I've done it is I've met with the individuals separately. So this particular client that I had, but we still actually remain in contact. I actually met with this client afterwards in a more social environment, and I expressed my vulnerability to say, I'm incredibly intimidated by you because you're operating from the space of, you don't want to shift. And I feel like the business needs to shift. Can we talk it through? And when you actually start to talk to that client, and if they are open to that discussion, you start to learn amazing things about why they're operating from that space. And then you can adjust your strategies accordingly.
I'm smiling because something I teach my kids often is we can never judge anyone. We were watching a movie last night. I mean, it was very interesting because the guy very much operated from the God complex, right? And the one thing, because we were watching this movie and they could see his childhood and his upbringing, I was able to relate back to why people show up in the way that they do. And if we're both coming with ego, it's adding fuel to the fire. But if the other person is able to take a step back, like you did so beautifully, is to say, well, hold on a moment. Let me be curious. Let me try and seek to understand rather than my point of view being understood, that I'm thinking you need to shift in your company strategy. And when in this movie, this guy, I mean, he had to die a metaphorical death to actually come to understand that he had lost everyone in his life because he came across with his God complex. And when I said to my kids, but do not judge, because if you look at this guy's life and his upbringing and the trauma and the conditioning and the story that his life was narrated with, he just projected that onto everyone else. So often, even when those triggers happen, see that, and I always say your triggers are your treasure, because it tells you where you have stuff to deal with and where you potentially are in a projection state, and where you and your shadow side, and not the good side of your shadow, the not so great dark side of your own shadow, because you may be operating with the judgment lens. And we've had this conversation before. No matter who it is, us as SMMEs operating from the God complex or being on the receiving end of that from a client or a supplier, when we let go of the judgment and we lead with empathy and we remain curious to understand, and I think you've got active listening on as one of the strategies, right? We're then able to become more generative in that exchange. And I'm sure that is what unfolded for you when you took that conversation in a more social setting outside of the business realm? What then unfolded is that you still remained in contact. You may not have the client relationship for now, but maybe in the future state might be reignited. Who knows?
Yeah, and it is a small world. You know, if you do burn a bridge and you walk away, that's why when you go onto social media and they have these kind of memes and jokes around people leaving the office and kind of like, you know, messing things up and burning the bridges, and it's seen as cool, standing your ground, you know, standing your worth. But actually, at the end of the day, we're all interconnected. And the reason why I like to always try and leave a client, because we contract based, you know, our stuff's always temporary, and I just love that space. And when we leave the client, it's always good to leave on a good footing, because you never know when you run into the client. And the problem I have is, because we work with so many clients, I never remember who they are. So it would be a stranger for me coming up to me and saying, "Gosh, how are you doing?" And I'd be on a back foot. But what I would know is I never have to think to myself, "Crap, I hope my service was good," or "Geez, I hope the experience with me was really good." And I think that's where we can beat the God complex. If we make it clear to the recipient, or the person that's within that space, that we are here to do a good job. And we cannot fulfill that mandate if this is the situation. And this is why we cannot do it. Facts. Unemotional. This is why we cannot do it. And it's been so many times, you know, you don't want to be the person that keeps writing the emails to your clients to say, you know, we have a problem, we have a problem, we have a problem. But you've got to be aware that in those problems, magic happens. Now I have a great relationship with this particular client. Yes, he still operates in the God complex. Yes, he does message me and say, not can you be at the offices? Be at the offices at 9 a.m. But I know that that is the space he plays in, and it doesn't trigger me anymore. And I know how to react to that. And I think that's important for us as SMMEs. The other big thing, if I can push on that, is when you're dealing with somebody or a company, you know, it could be an entire company that just operates with such a lot of ego, or you deal with a particular CEO or a leader that's got this God complex, try and schedule your engagements with them early in the morning, because you have a lot more energy and you are kind of ready, you're vitalized, and there hasn't been other triggers that have been pushed off the rest of the day. If you do it in the afternoons or midday in the afternoons, that person's actually generally more difficult. The early mornings early mornings is your best bet. That's when you can hit them when they are the most vulnerable and they're not kind of standing in that space as yet. And then you can engage with them, and also you're strong enough and you contain that energy enough to be able to deal with those situations. That's what I've learned. I book all my difficult clients early in the morning. God, I hope none of my clients are listening.
You know, it's interesting that you say you book all your difficult clients, but even me as a coach or facilitator, I do not facilitate in the afternoon, and neither, whether it's facilitating a design thinking session or sales modules to drive better effective sales or productivity, whatever it is, I never do it in the afternoon, because at that point, the person's brain capacity is already reduced. They have been triggered and in a reactive state. And I mean, you said you react better. I think we respond better. We're in a responsive state rather than a reactive state,
Yeah,
right?
that's correct.
Because in the mornings, we have all good intentions, that we set out our day not to have a crap day. We want to be purposeful. We want to make impact. We want to deliver. We want to have great relationships. We want to have meaningful connection. Nobody sets out, I believe, to operate from the God complex. Just my view, I don't believe, because we're social beings and we want to be meaningfully connected. But it's the triggers and our projections that shifts us into the egoic state that we operate from those positions. Not necessarily ideal, but it does happen.
You know, it's, for me, I'm going to disagree a little bit with that, on the sense that I think some people, the lifestyle that they have chosen pushes them into that position. And I have this thing, gosh, And you said, I'm not going to sound like a real egg, but I have this thing about people that drive in that yellow lane. Now I book my meetings and I'm always on time. I try to be. And I always feel like, why are you more important than me? Why do you think you are more important, that you are operating from a space where your importance is elevated because you can drive down? Yes, there's no cops, and yes, there should be. But as human beings, we need to make those decisions on a daily basis on where we stand and where does our integrity, how far does that stretch? So, because I'm a firm believer, if I see a supplier that we work with, their vehicle's driving in the yellow lane, I won't work with the supplier. Because my thing is if they can take that shortcut, if that is something, and they might not even be, when I speak to them about it and they go, geez, I'm not even aware of it, that even irritates me further because we know it's prevalent in the country. We know that people do it. Put measures in place. Talk through your integrity as a business. I'd like to believe I have a lot of integrity, but there are times when I fumble and I fall and I do things from a God complex, no doubt. But when I have an issue with a client and they operate from a God complex and they escalate that issue to a company we work, because we work through corporates, and we get into a bit of trouble around it, it annoys me because it's almost like I've proven my position as an SMME. This is how I operate. We've been proving ourselves over and over again. The key point I'm trying to make is that sometimes being out of the God complex and being aware of the God complex actually can become a trigger for us, where we feel we are so full of integrity that, we are so good that other people that make mistakes are bad. We all make mistakes. We all make decisions on a daily basis on what boundaries we can push. We're human. It's a human thing. But it's that process of analyzing that and making sure that we always try harder. We always try to be better. We always try to grow. We always try to be more spiritually in tune with what we are doing as SMMEs. And I believe that as SMMEs, we can be the ones that set that moral compass for business. I can tell you, corporate doesn't have that. And as SMMEs, we can do that as individuals. We can set the boundaries in place so that we do encounter less and less of the God complex in corporate. I'm kind of nailing corporate, but I feel like they need it.
Remind me, what was the part that you were challenging me on? Because I think we're saying the same thing, we're just saying it very differently.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Correct.
Because what you're saying is that what I was saying is we must be careful and be mindful of where we're in judgment and where that judgment lens is. And often people that have this complex is either in a projection state. But now I'm going to go with your example. But before I do, let's read Kelsey's comment. She says, so true, learning how to deal with people who have the God complex helps you better keep your cool when you get triggered or respond better, which is true, right? Now, let's keep about the people in the yellow lane. So that's
does it happen in Western Cape, Anissa?
It does. It does.
That's so perfect.
Okay. So I'm gonna keep myself honest here, that there are times that I've taken that lane, right? Because I've either had an emergency or I did not manage my time effectively, or I left very early, but I'm stuck here in this 2.5-hour commute. But now I'm seeing that between 6 and 9 or 5 and 9, it's the bus lane, or it's only for buses and taxis. And I see a whole lot of other cars doing it. I don't do it until that very end when I know, shit, I've stayed in my lane.
I'm going to be late. Yeah.
Literally and figuratively. I've stayed in my lane. But now I know after 15 minutes, now the type of person that I am is that I will communicate to whoever I need to be meeting with, or if it's an event I need to attend, I will always send a message and say, here's a bit of unforeseen things happening here. I may very well be late. But if I see a gap and it's past the compliance time of 5 to 9, I'm going to take the gap. Now, is it wrong of me to do so? And whoever's sitting in the other car might be judging me. May I have potentially have had an emergency that was so important I needed to take that lane. So I'm just saying we need to move with blameless discernment when we are trying to point a finger at people who are not staying in their lane.
Literally,
Makes sense?
Yeah, I just think
And I
from
don't
the
mean just the lane. I'm not meaning only traffic. I'm meaning this in totality from the God
context.
complex conversation that we're having.
I think that's where our social commandments, like our 10 commandments that Christians have, social commandments come into play where we as a society accept and not accept certain things. We've normalized driving in the yellow lane, and we've rationalized it around, while the lane's open and I can just do it. There's no consequence for it. But then if you just think about that rationale, and somebody applies that rationale to a different situation, you're going to judge them. If they murder someone, they say, well, the person was just there and there's nobody like telling me not to do it, so I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to get away with it. You'll say, yeah, but that's a completely different thing. But the rationale is the same. If you want your kids to make a decision based on a certain rationale, you need to do it. You need to do it as well. And it is difficult because as humans, we get busy and we get caught up and we make decisions to do things. And we sometimes don't even feel guilty about it. But it always just talks to me. It talks to that person's ethics and that person's understanding of how society really works. We're so interconnected that if one person throws a piece of paper on the floor, it effectively targets all of us because we're connected. That person feels like it's okay to throw the piece of paper on the floor because they're giving jobs to someone. But the argument is that a street sweeper is not actually there to pick up litter. They're there to clean the streets for the water, for the natural, stuff that happens around us. So it's the rationale that gets me. It's what makes you believe.
Point taken, because many years ago, I attended a training and this guy said, he asked us, who here gets irate with these taxi drivers who think that they own the road? And most people put up their hand. I think I did too, right? Because we get frustrated. They just cut in and they have no respect. There's no ethics. It's just, they don't give a damn. So he said, but what if you changed your perspective? Because your perception is they're arrogant, they try and own the road, they have no respect for others, etc., etc. And he said, if you change your perspective that they are actually giving a service and they want to get their clients to their destination on time, never mind not safe, but on time, what does that look like if we change our perspective on that? Very different, right? So
yeah, but the laws are, the laws are there. It's the same when you go into a situation with a client who operates from the God complex. They're not going to apply the laws. They're going to apply their rationale to the situation. You're going to go according to contract, but you're not going to win it because they're not operating from the same level. So we might change our perspective on the taxi drivers, but the point is they're breaking the law. And they're doing it because they have to enrich a certain group of people. A bunch of taxi owners, there's a handful of them that operate and make incredible amounts of money. So we can change our perspective 100 times. It doesn't change the fact that they break the law. And the only thing we need to do is accept it because we cannot actually change that right now. As a single SMME, we're not going to waste our energy fighting that. So we'll let that be. But the law is the law. And I think that is where SMMEs, we can toe the moral line. And I'm not saying that I do that. I mean, I make lots of mistakes. And it's very difficult because sometimes you do feel like you're literally flying solo. I mean, I speed. My thing is speeding. I need to get when I need to go, and I go. I don't even know the speed limits on the road. I drive, right? And that's wrong because it's breaking the law. And I can justify it as much as I want. So when it comes to the God complex, people who operate from the God complex don't tend to apply social law. They don't tend to apply even written law. They apply their own rationale. So you're actually dealing with someone who's created an environment that they feel comfortable in. So when you walk into a company and you're offering a service to someone, they've created that company around a rationale that they feel comfortable with. You're coming and disrupting that by saying to them, but hang on, this is the facts. And they go, well, that's not my fact. So it's very important that you're strong in your approach, you understand the parameters of what you're supposed to do, but you are adaptive and quickly make a decision about what are you prepared to accept and what are you prepared to fight for. And then that is the back and forth that we have as SMMEs.
It's a very valid point that you've raised there. I mean, I'm looking at some of the 10 points that we were going to touch on. And I think that is also offering controlled choices. As one thing, having a perspective, and first and foremost, being hyper rational is actually can be in our favor at times on the light side, knowing the facts, but there can be a time that it's a shadow side when we can sabotage and actually derail the relationship, and then that's the negative side of the God complex again. But offering controlled choices here, I have written here, guide the decision-making process by offering a range of controlled options, allowing the client to feel in control without derailing your goals. I mean, that's an interesting stance to take, because what you're saying is we're both autonomous here. Nobody's one above the other, but making the client feel that they are still in control, because that's ultimately when somebody's hyper rational, it's their way or the highway. But what this is saying, this strategy is saying, let's be open, let's be generative, so that we can find a middle way through. And at least that's how I understand it, Brad. Maybe you could just unpack that a bit more.
Yeah, it's the thing is that, we have choices as an SMME, and you spoke about it earlier, that this is our bread and butter. And even if we are successful SMMEs, the key for us is if the basics of any business is to always focus on sales. Focus on making sure that you have options on the board. Don't rely on one business. Don't rely on word of mouth. I mean, I met a company that's been running for 30 years. They're a small business. They've been running for 30 years. They're fairly successful in their space, and they've built their business off word of mouth. And the conversation we're having now is, but you're growing to a point where that's not enough. And I think to myself, you survived in business and you flourished for 30 years on word of mouth. That's phenomenal. But yes, that's risky. And it must have put you in a lot of compromising positions where you've had to just eat the crap, sorry for saying, because you know that this is the client pool that you have to work with. But as SMMEs, if we have a very strong sales strategy in place and we couple that with strong marketing assets that we use strategically, we can be in a position where we say, you know what, I'm going to make a choice on this one. I'm not going to eat the stuff on this. I'm going to let this client go, and I'm going to shift my focus onto the clients that I can communicate and can work with. But Janine's move to walk away and say no, and to reach that point of, I'm not sure the circumstance, but I'm guessing to reach that kind of volcanic point needs to be supported with the fact that you have other options. Can't say no when that's your bread and butter. So we put ourselves in these compromising positions as SMMEs because we don't focus on strategic selling as much as we should, because it is cock. It's tough to do it. You've got to consistently do it. You've got to call people you don't know. You've got to network consistently. You've got to find interest in people. You've got to get that energy up on a daily basis. And people just don't tend to do it when they get busy. And I think that is the ultimate key to getting yourself out of any situation you found yourself in. Know how to hunt, know what you can hunt and where, and have that formula with you consistently. That's the power of growth. That, for me, is your route to success.
I like that, because what it's saying is we're not putting our eggs in one basket. We are almost being courageous and putting ourselves out there. We're willing to accept the no's and the rejections, because we know it's just a redirection to whoever we need to be doing work with. And a no is also not an indefinite no. So it's about continuously, I think, leveraging our resources, our networks, and staying consistent and showing up.
Yeah, it's tough.
Not
And he said, you know,
it's tough.
it's one of the hardest things to do, you know. And I think this is where we really, as SMMEs, you know, we need to communicate better with each other and share that emotional cost that we're giving. And I always equate it to this thing about, you know, you have a bad month in, and we all have them, and you get invited out, and you're sitting at this restaurant, and all your friends that are earning salaries are ordering, you know, their month-end meals, and you're sitting on the menu thinking, God, I wonder if I can just eat the bread, or I wonder if I should just have water, you know, because you just literally don't have the money for it. And I think that in itself is such a beautiful space, because we go through so much as SMMEs that we almost push that out the door when we settle to work with a client that puts us through hell. It's like we set ourselves up. And we do this because we just don't want to push the sale element. I've seen it so many times, so many people, businesses I've gone into, and you talk through their sales strategy, and somebody says to me, no, I get my business from word of mouth. And I'm thinking, ish. They don't understand that you're not in control of sales. You're not in control of your business. You're relying on what somebody else says about your business. So now all your energy is going to ensuring that that person is in good space with you, instead of focusing on bringing potential clients in and creating relationships you never knew existed. Going global, going across border, doing work for people in the US, doing people in Asia. We live in a global village. The whole world awaits you. But you sit back and you wait for Sue to tell John about your business so that you can make a bit of money. Doesn't make sense, eh?
You are raising another, salient point here. I mean, again, I'll refer to in my facilitation sessions. I have slides that I will present on, but I find that the best facilitation happens when it's an experiential learning space that we create, where people can be vulnerable and where they can share their lived experiences. And you alluded to it earlier on, is that our responsibilities as SMMEs is actually to share these struggles, these battles that we're having to endure, and how we've actually overcome it, or how we are trying to overcome it, and maybe leveraging those that have overcome it to see what can we replicate. And one of the things that most of these entrepreneurs said today in closing off this 9 months was that it's so great to be on a program where you can just be raw and share the stuff that you said right now. Oh, but I can't actually afford this bill right now, or to be at that particular lunch event, or to be at that networking event, or wherever it is in the space, because I'm thinking about my next client or my next deal, or the fact that at the end of the month I'm not necessarily going to have enough. And those were the real things that came through today, is that everyone's either running out of cash flow, they are struggling to make sure that the bills are paid. Sometimes this God complex is so prevalent, not by choice, but because of fear. It's underpinned by fear. And a lot of them want to keep their finger on the pulse because they don't know whether they're going to make it at the end of the month to pay all salaries. And they don't know if they're going to be able to drive expansion in their business, or get repeat business from existing customers. And these are the things that are the lived experiences. And then one particular role play that I did a few months ago, today in the final stages of the closeout, they shared how valuable that was to demonstrate how they will sabotage themselves as SMMEs. And the one played like they were the supplier, and the other one played like, the proposal was too high. And the one that the client is now working with on the proposal, she was like, yeah, no, don't worry, I'll drop my price. And our prices have increased. But we don't understand the implications and the far-reaching consequences of that. So the God complex within clients or suppliers, we need to put a handle on it. We need to set those boundaries, because it can also be the catalyst of our demise as business owners. So we need to be able to be vulnerable and say, actually, I cannot reduce my price, because if I do this, I'm not profitable. But in close, my departure point on this is that most SMMEs are yearning for a space that they can just be real and not just come to theory and top content and the next best tool or using AI. It's about the real conversations, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I was going to answer. I know you're closing. I think I interrupted your closing. But
No, that's fine. I was done with that point.
But that's why for us as a company, we're looking at it and at bringing back the town hall. When we were kids, the town hall was a very important place to hold community events, and it still happens in some areas where community plays a very big role. But I sometimes feel like we need a town hall for SMMEs where we can just sit down and express frustration. I've got a SMME that I worked with. We've actually become, just said now, don't build relationships. We've become quite close. And she survived cancer and built a business at the same time. And then we have another SMME who is has fallen pregnant and is expanding her business at the same time. So, life happens. And you come with all this life happening into a corporate environment where they've been very good at parking all of that at the door. If you fall pregnant in a corporate environment, you go into maternity leave, someone replaces you, and you get moved out, you have your baby, stay away, we're bringing somebody else in to continue the job. But we come in with a lot of emotion, we come in with a lot of life happens. We almost rock up and we've got that Snoopy, we've almost got those bugs around our heads. People can kind of see that we come in with some stuff. But that's the magic of being an SMME, and we need to own that. We need to own that. We need to own the fact that we are so awesome, and we all have greatness, and we all bring something to the table. And when you join a program, like your stuff that you do is absolutely amazing, that you're not just coming to learn, but you're coming to give. And when you are in a situation where you're dealing with another SMME and you can see they're wobbling, it is your prerogative to come up and say to them, listen, let me support you. Let me give you advice. Let me give you some guidance. But we tend to be tight-lipped because we believe the markets are too small or we're worried about competition. But if you have an active sales process, you never have to worry about those things. You are in control all the time.
Brad, I'm hearing that we are autonomous and we have the gift of being able to leverage that to the best of our ability, not just for the greater good of ourselves, but the greater good of those that we're impacting in our business, whether it's the people that we employ, whether it's the future employees that we want to, give employment to. And I think we are in such a favorable position that our role, we underestimate what the role of the SMME is to the economy, to the country. And with unemployment being as rampant as it is now, both within the youth as well as those that have been in the working cycle for a bit longer than for some of us, I find that if we just come back to the essence of why are we doing this, and I think we've spoken many a times about the why and what does success look like and who are we actually impacting, we'll all operate very differently. It will be more in alignment of that oneness that you spoke about earlier on, that we actually know different, that our objectives are very similar. We just want to be able to serve and impact. And however that takes shape or form for whoever in
Exactly.
their businesses, it's the same thing. But it's
Exactly.
the silos that we need to be breaking. So the town hall idea, and as you say, there are these things happening, but not in the way that it should be, bringing these lived experiences and the real experiences to the table so that people can feel a bit more inclusive and not feel like they're in their little boxes or feeling isolated or lonely on their journeys, that they're not alone.
Not alone. We're all going through it. That Janine's reference about letting a client go and going through that first kind of experience of letting that client go. Many of us have been there, and it's a rite of passage that we need to acknowledge, and we need to turn into tradition. And we even need to have our own queue at Checkers, I still think, and our own parking spaces, because we play a pivotal role, and we should be able to use the yellow lanes because our meetings are important and we are driving the economy. But it's always been frowned upon, and it goes back to consumerism, and it goes back to what success looks like in a community, and this is what I try to break down by saying to somebody that your success and my success and the success of your neighbor is very different. We all have different stories, and we need to acknowledge that. And it's not based off a collective. Success is not a collective thing. It's your version is your version, my version is my version. But consumerism and corporates have played a very big role in kind of pulling that all together and saying, well, if you drive this particular car, you deemed successful. But I mean, I know many SMMEs that drive 20, 30-year-old paid for cars that I look at and go, I wish I had your success, because they just have it. They're living their success story. They are so happy with their lives, and they have that fulfillment. And that is what we're all chasing as human beings. So really and truly, town hall is, the concept is to get people in their communities talking at SMME level about the frustrations they face and find a collective agreement in that space to operate from, and it's almost like unionizing the SMMEs. God, wouldn't that be amazing? Would it be amazing?
Let's ask the audience. So if Noreen and Kelsey and whoever's on the Instagram side, what are your thoughts about creating this town hall that makes things a bit more like leveling the playing field and letting others feel like there's a sense of belonging and that they can be real and authentic in their shares and understand how collaborations can be a bit more effective, because otherwise everybody's fighting for survival, and we want to move away from the scarcity lack mindset. I mean, we are talking about the entrepreneur mindset here, and the reality is when we're in an abundant mindset, we'll be more collaborative. We'll be willing to share ideas. We'll be willing to be okay with being wrong and getting other inputs and not feeling, we won't be operating from ego or the God complex, basically.
Yeah, I think it is. And I mean, that is, when you visit the really big cities across the globe, they have this, it's just so impersonal. And you have this environment where you just feel like you're a number. But what I feel like it makes us so magical where we live right now is you don't feel like that here. You feel like there's something unique about you. You feel like you have something to contribute and something to offer. And everybody has their roles, good and bad, but everybody has their roles to play. But the key is to, if you unlock your greatness and you understand your potential as an SMME, when you get into an environment where the God complex shows up, you are very quickly able to navigate that environment because you are in your greatness. You are living your success story, your happiness. And that is very important for me. And I think that affects the way you sell. It affects how you approach having cash flow issues. It affects how, when you get bad news, how you accept that news. If you're living in your greatness and you're living your passion and your success story, your day-to-day life will be a lot easier. It's that vitamin pill that I believe we should all be taking.
It's beautiful the way that you've concluded the segment today, because essentially what I'm hearing you say is when you are in your zone of genius, when you are values aligned and you are clear on that vision and that mission, and you are truly living by your North Star, your triggers will definitely become your treasures and you will operate from a different vantage point. So I want to thank you, Brad. This has been, as always, a
Yeah,
beautiful
it's awesome.
exchange. And I always learn constantly from you. You bring a lot of wisdom, but you bring a lot of humility to this conversation. And I think that's what's lacking in many of the environments. And I love that there's a call to action. And I know that this call to action of the town hall is just not talk. And I know that this is something that you're working on actively in the background. So for anyone that would like to participate and join in on that movement, by creating a town hall and making it more collaborative, don't hesitate to reach out to Brad or myself, and let's have these conversations. Let's get it out in the open and let's work together to get our own lane for the SMMEs, get our own town halls for the significant role that you play in the context of many families, the economy, and the country as a whole. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you from my side. Any closing comments from yours before we say goodbye to everyone?
No, just thanks so much. Great session. Really, really had fun.
Always, always fun. As you know, stay on with me. Those that have been here on Instagram, thank you for staying the entire hour. I see somebody did join a bit late, but do watch the replay for some beautiful, beautiful nuggets that came through from Brad, and some humor, because we don't need to take ourselves so seriously as well. So don't forget to stay light, stay nimble, and we'll see you next month, which is the last Wednesday of every month. Take care. Bye.